And in reading, I came across The Star Money again. And I had forgotten that I had read it before. And so I started reading it and I went, what on earth? The story had taken on a totally different meaning for me. It was now about faith. It was now about what you do when the whole world has gone mad. And so this is my version of The Star Money. And after that, I'll be singing Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child. There was a young girl whose parents died. And the room that she had was soon taken. And not long after that, the bed that she had was also gone. And she was thrown out onto the country with the clothes on her back and some bread that some charitable person had given her. Now, she was a good and a pious girl, and she believed in a good God. And as she was walking in the country, a man came up to her and said, I'm hungry. I am so hungry. And so she took that last piece of bread that she had and she gave it to the man and she said, may God be with you in your use of this bread. And she continued. And then a child came up to her and said, I'm cold. My ears are so cold. The child had nothing on its head. And so she took off her hood and she gave it to the child. And then child after child after child came to her. One for the coat, because the child had no coat, so she gave her coat. Another frock, and so she gave her frock. And she entered into the forest, deep into a forest, and it was so dark. All she could see was the stars up in the heavens. And then she heard this voice, I'm cold. I have nothing on my body. And so the little girl looked around and she thought, well, there's nobody who's going to see my naked body. And she took the shirt, the last item of clothing that she had, and she gave it to the child. And then she looked up to the heavens. And all of a sudden, her body felt warm. What is this? And she felt her body, and there were clothes on her body, and she could feel by the touch that these clothes were far superior to any quality that she had before. And she looked up to the heavens again. And then she saw these stars falling down, and as they came down, down, they changed into gold coins. She could see that they were gold coins. And she took her dress, the lower part, and she extended the material to catch all of these coins. And when it was heavy enough, she took the little material that was left and she tied it up. And from that time on, she was rich for her entirety of her life. Mm-hmm. 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 Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel, oh Lord, like a motherless child. And I get down on my knees and I pray. Oh, I get down on my knees and I pray. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Linda, are you ready to go next?
Yes, I was just wondering if it was me or not, but my name is Linda Brown. I live in Chula Vista, California. I am 5 miles from the Tijuana border. Been here all my life, so I don't know anything else. The story that I am telling is called The Most Beautiful Coat, and it is not my original story. I read it someplace and just kind of liked it, so I've adapted it to what I normally tell. Linda and Faye were best friends and had been since the beginning of time, because you see, they went to kindergarten all the way up to high school and graduated from high school together. And with them being best of friends, it was an unwritten rule that they never went after the same guy. And that worked well for them because they didn't like the same kind of guy. Their likes in men was as different as night and day. Well, that was until they met Charlie Too Cool Brown. They worked in this fancy restaurant. And one day old Charlie Too Cool walked into the restaurant and he had on the most expensive suit, shoes, hat. Oh, he was just gorgeous. And they spent quite a bit of their time thereafter trying to find out where he worked, because they never saw him during the day. So that had to mean he had a job. So that was a good thing there. But they continued to look, but they never could find him or find out where he lived. And then one night, he walked into that restaurant and he had on a long white mink coat. Well, Faye and Linda happened to be standing at the bar at that time, and they stood there in shock, and they dropped their glasses. It was just, they had never seen anyone with a coat like that before. And at that point, they both decided that Charlie Too Cool Brown was the man that they both wanted. But they did say that whoever got him, they would still remain good friends. You don't ever let a man come in between you and your good girlfriend. And so they decided what they would do is to throw a party. And they invited all of their friends and a few of their enemies. And they rented out the restaurant where they worked. And they waited until Mr. Too Cool came into the restaurant. And then they both handed him the invitation. That way they knew he was going to come, and he couldn't say that he hadn't been invited. So they got everything all set up. They even bought, you know, that little black dress that every woman needs with the jewels, the encrusted jewels, something absolutely gorgeous that neither one of them could afford. But they bought it anyway. They felt like Mr. Brown was worth it. And the night of the party, everybody showed up and they were dancing and waiting on the food, and everything was wonderful, but Charlie wasn't there. He was really late. And of course, Linda and Faye could hear those quiet conversations in the corner with, I wonder what happened to Charlie. Because, you know, girl, you know that's why they threw that party, was for Charlie to come in and for all of us to meet him. And so after a while, though, the doorman called Linda and Faye. And they said it must have been Charlie. So they, of course, sauntered over to the door, because you can't hurry in polite company. They sauntered over to the door. And of course, it was Charlie. But he came in, jeans, a sweatshirt, and tennis shoes. He even had on a baseball cap. What was he thinking? After all, They said dress to impress. Who was he trying to impress? So Linda took over and she said, Charlie, what happened? And he said, don't you remember me? I come in here to eat every night. And you and Faye are just such wonderful servers. And so I came in, you were together when you gave me the invitation. Yeah, but Charlie, we said dress to impress. What happened? We can't let you in like that. And they didn't let him in. Well, Charlie wasn't finished. And he went back home. And as he went back home to get dressed to impress, Linda and Faye were trying to explain to everyone about the uninvited guest at the door. And Charlie changed to his dress to impress. And of course, he put on that white fur coat. And he came back in, and this time he didn't stop at the doorman. He just pushed those doors open and walked right in. And Linda and Faye, just this time, there was no sauntering. They ran over and gave him a big hug and a kiss and sat him at the head of the table. And everyone finally got to eat because, of course, they're waiting on Charlie. And they came, so they gave him his food on a silver platter because this is Charlie. And they want to make sure that he knows how much they care for him because he's going to pick one of them. They're so sure they're going to be living in that mansion that he's got to be living in. So everyone begins to eat. And Charlie fills up his plate and he stands up and he begins to fill his pockets. He's saying, eat, eat my fine coat, eat, eat. Without you, I would not have been invited. Eat my fine coat. He even poured champagne into the pockets while he danced and laughed, and everyone is looking at him and saying, what happened? What happened? Well, after Linda and Faye got over the shock of him acting like that, they hurriedly took him to the door and put him out. And then they came back to, girl, did you see what happened? Charlie, that too cool Charlie. He knew what they were doing. And after that, Linda and Faye decided they would never, ever judge a man by his clothes. Well, not and be as transparent as they were with this one. But Charlie, did they ever see him again? Well, no, they didn't. And do you think he was wrong when he said without the clothing he wouldn't have been invited? Well, poor Charlie, he had to leave town that night. And the worst part of it was he had to leave wearing the clothes that he had on because he couldn't go back and tell the boss what had happened because he was actually a butler. And he had been wearing the boss's clothes after the boss went to bed. So he had to hurriedly leave town and never show his face again. And Linda and Faye, well, they're still paying off the restaurant and the dress and all of those things that they did to get this man who they thought was absolutely perfect. And that's the end.
Thank you. I can't make my timer stop. Okay, good. You know that was 8 minutes to like the second? The second. Wow. That was, but that was fun. That was a fun story. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you all got my email that had the order of people. So we're almost going by that order. And that would make Claudia next. Are you ready to go next, Claudia? Your mic was on, so now when you clicked it, now your mic is off.
Sorry, okay.
Okay, good.
All right. Chapter 5 of the book of Revelation. And then I saw in the right hand of the one seated on the throne. A scroll written on the inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open this scroll and to break its seals?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll and to look inside. And I began to weep bitterly because no one was found worthy to open the scroll and to look inside. And then one of the elders said to me, "Stop weeping. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals." And then I saw between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders a lamb standing, looking as if it had been slain. It had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. The Lamb went and took the scroll from the right hand of the one seated on the throne. And when he had done this, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders bowed down in worship before the Lamb. Each had a harp and a gold bowl full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. They sang together a new song with these words: "Worthy you are to take this scroll and to break its seals, for you were slaughtered, and by your blood you ransomed for God saints from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests in service to our God, and they will reign on earth." And then I saw and I heard the voices of many angels surrounding the throne and the 4 living creatures and the elders. They numbered myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands. And they sang in full voice, "Worthy is the Lamb that was slaughtered to receive power and wealth, wisdom and might, honor and glory and blessing." And then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and under the sea and all that is in them singing out, "To the one seated on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor, glory and might forever and ever." And the 4 living creatures kept shouting, "Amen." And the elders bowed down in worship. This is the word of God.
Thank you, Claudia. Next on my list, I have Alice. Are you ready to go next, Alice?
I am ready. long time past, way back down in Feline County, there was a family of cats who ran a dairy farm. The daddy cat was named Jake, and the mama cat was Miriam. They had 2 kittens. The first kitten was Malcolm. He was the oldest because he was the first. And the second kitten was Jerome. They called him JJ. Now, the sad part I have to tell you is this, that when JJ was still a babe, a kitty, before he was even weaned, an old coyote snatched away Mama Miriam. Now, Jake was not prepared to be a single dad, but he did the best he could in raising up those 2 boys best he could. Now, Malcolm listened. He was focused and he followed instructions pretty well. But little JJ, he seemed to always have his mind somewhere else. He was chasing butterflies, leaping from place to place, always in search and hunting for something. Maybe he was wondering what had happened to Mama Miriam. But that's just how JJ was. So it really was no surprise when one day JJ came to Daddy Jake and said, "Pops, I'd like you to give me a little advance so I can go and find myself." Now, Jake knew his boy, and he knew that JJ wouldn't go off on his own just as he was. And he figured it'd be better to give him a little piece of money to put in his pocket when he decided to launch himself than it would be to just let him go and start from scratch. So he got the little bit of money from his daddy, and as quick as he could, he just said, "Well, meow y'all" to his daddy Jake and to his brother Malcolm, and with his tail straight up in the air, walked on down the road. It wasn't long before JJ came to the big city of Canine Town. Now, he had to be careful there because there were a lot of dogs there. And the theme song was, "Who let the dogs off? Woo, 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 woo." But he found himself down in Tin Can Alley. And he started to hang out with the cool cats and the alley cats. And he enjoyed there at the Tin Cali Cafe. He loved the lovely sounds of Miss Calico Kitty, where she would blow some mean jazz and sing a good song. And and you get there, and for a little bit of catnip, little bit of gambling, and before you know it, old JJ is caught up in a tussle in some kind of cat fight, and suddenly he has no money and no friends, and he's all alone there in Canine Town. So he says, "I guess I gotta get a job now." So he searches around and finds the only job he could find, the lowest job that there was, because it matched his lack of skills and lack of any real work experience. He got a job scooping poop at the Canine Town dog racetrack. And now here we find old JJ the cat standing in a pile of poop, saying, "This is crazy. Why, back at home, I don't have to go through all of this. I think I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna tell my dad, 'Hey, Dad, I was wrong. You were right. And now I'm woke. Will you please let me come back home?'" So old JJ started going home long journey, creeping along like a scaredy cat because he didn't know what to expect. And now, a few days later, old J Cat was curled up, perched in the windowsill, as you like to do, getting a little bit of sun in the afternoon. And he looked up and he saw this mangy old cat with his tail dragging on the ground, creeping back toward home. And OJ, he realized that was his little kitty, grown up and looking scraggly. And he ran out into the road and he tackled the cat and rolled around in the dirt and started licking and grooming him. And JJ tried to say, Dad, it's me. I'm sorry, I'm woke. So sorry. But Jake just said to the staff, get him a new collar with a bell. Go groom him up and get out the salmon cakes and some milk and some ice cream. Because this little kitty cat of mine was dead and now he's alive. He was lost. He's a lost cat who's now been found. And so they got this celebration going on in the house. And old Malcolm, big brother cat, heard he's curious. What's going on? He asked the staff. They said, the lost cat's been found. Your brother, he's back. You ought to come on and see Daddy got this stuff laid out for him. Well, when Malcolm heard that his brother had come back, he went from being curious to furious, and he would not go in. So Daddy Cat, Jake, came out to meet Malcolm Cat where he was. And he listened to Malcolm just complain and spew mad things about his brother, about how he'd been there and he didn't even have a mouse party for him. But Daddy Jake said, this is your brother. He was dead, we thought, and now he's alive. He was lost. He's the lost cat who's been found. You need to come out and celebrate with him. Come on in the house. But you know the sad thing? That's how the story ends, the way I heard it. But I ask you, what do you think Malcolm Cat should do? Or what do you think JJ Cat should do? Or what do you think Daddy Jake Cat should do? Somebody ought to do something about this situation. May God bless you real good. And that's a story taken from a Bible story, but I sort of adapted it in my own way.
Thank you. Didn't even have a mouse party. That was cute. Before we go on to the next storyteller, well, he's not there now. I saw Paul in the attendees list who was on the...
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, you're there. Yay. Okay.
For some reason, I've been here, but I was kind of going out because I didn't have any options to mute or unmute or do video or anything. So I was really worried that I wouldn't pop up, but I'm here now.
Here you are. Okay. Well, I had you on the list after all
hello.
this, but would you like to settle in, or would you like to go ahead and go now?
No, I've been here. Like I said, I just didn't know. The problem was that I was listening to all this. By the way, awesome story. The Charlie story before that was a great adaptation of a classic. But I just didn't know how to get the video sound to work. So there we go. All right, if you guys can hear me all, I'm Paul Grenier. I'm over in New Jersey, kind of beginning my storytelling career-ish. And story I want to tell, I was thinking, it's Halloween. And story I want to tell is called The Girl Who Was Never Afraid Again. And it's my retelling of a story by Sheldon Overman. It's a Jewish folktale, I believe, or it's based on a Jewish folktale. And it's about this girl. Her name was Hannah. And she was being picked on by a bully. And it was really, whenever she saw this bully, she just got terrified. And she didn't tell anybody, and every day she just got more and more scared. And she didn't know what to do. She was wandering around in a daze. And she was walking through town, and she heard two ladies talking. And one of them said, yes, I had this coworker who was very mean, but I went to the old lady Yelda, who was at the end of the street. And she worked her magic, and now I don't have any problems. And Hannah thought, well, gee, maybe this old lady Yelda can help me with my bully and help me with my fear. So she tracked her down, and she lived in a kind of old, dilapidated house, kind of near the end of the street at the edge of town. And she went in and she said, Yelda knocked on the door, and Yelda answered and said, how can I help you? Hannah said, there's this girl at school who really scares me, and I don't know what to do. And Yelda said, well, does she physically hurt you? Does she steal from you? And she said, and Hannah said, no, she's just mean and really scary. Could you do something for me? And Yelda said, yeah, I think I can help you. She said, but in order for me to work my magic, I need 3 hairs from the biggest, meanest, scariest dog in the entire town. So you need to walk around town and find the biggest, meanest, scariest dog and get 3 hairs from that dog. And then I can help you with your problem. So she didn't know what to do. And she walked around town, and finally she stopped by this big house. And in the yard was this big, black, gray hound with sharp teeth, huge, almost as tall as she was. And he was behind a fence and chained up. And just looking at it gave her the chills, but she knew she had to get its hairs so that Yelda could work her magic. And she noticed that outside, right by the fence, there was a little piece of hair just sitting there by on a leaf. So she quietly crept up and she snatched that hair, and as soon as she did, the dog lunged forward, scared her so bad she ran, but she still had that hair in her paw. So the next day, she came back to that house, and there was the dog chained up behind the fence. This time he was asleep. And she crept quietly forward, and she saw another hair on the lawn. So she stuck up and she reached across, put her hand through the bars and grabbed the hair. And as soon as she did, the dog leaped up. She jumped away and started running away, but now she had 2 of the hairs that she needed. And she wasn't going to quit. Well, the next day was a lot harder, because when she went there were no hairs on the ground. She went up to the fence, and the dog started to growl. And she pulled out a doggy treat, and she threw it to the dog. And he gobbled it up, but he still continued to growl at her. So she went away. And the next day, she came back. And the dog saw her and growled, and she gave him another doggy treat. And this time, he still growled at her, but not as much. And every day for the next 2 weeks, she kept visiting him. And he growled less and less, until finally, he actually wagged his tail when she would come down the road. And after about 3 weeks, she was able to hold the doggy treat out, and the dog came and ate it right out of her hand. And she was able to stroke his head, and she got a whole handful of hairs. And she thanked the dog, and then in triumph, she ran all the way to Yelda's house. And she said, Yelda, I got what you need. I got what you need. And Yelda answered the door and said, did you get the 3 hairs from the biggest, scariest dog in the town? And she said, yes, I got them right here. Now what are you going to do with them? Are you going to make a potion so that you can change my bully into an ugly frog? Or maybe you could turn her into a bug, I could squish her? Or maybe just a flower so I wouldn't be afraid. And Yelda laughed and said, no, I'm not going to do any of that. I don't make potions or spells. And Yelda said, what? And Hannah said, what do you mean? Well, what are you going to do? And Yelda said, well, I'm not going to do anything. And Hannah said, what do you mean? That won't change anything. She's still going to be scary. She's still going to be mean. And you'll change her because you've already changed. If you were able to befriend the biggest, meanest, scariest dog in all of town, then why would you just be afraid of some girl your own age? And after that moment, Hannah was never afraid again.
Thank you, Paul. Next on my list, I have Wendy. Are you ready to go next, Wendy?
Let me unmute myself and begin my story. And I brought a timer here. I don't know whether, if I look down, I'm looking at the timer to see how far I'm going. So I don't get too involved with things. My story is a personal story. It's my own story. And the title of the story is called Mr. Peterson. About 20 years ago, I adopted as my dad an older gentleman. My marriage had just ended, and I really felt the need to reach out to someone that I could just talk to other than a therapist. And I'd known this gentleman for about 30 years, and he'd always been fond of me, and made a nice father-daughter relationship. And I have 2 children, and he got 2 grandchildren in the deal. So he had an instant family. He started attending my church, and after church, we would go to a diner to have lunch and enjoyed the company. And I had a chance just to sort of soothe over some rough edges of having a man that I love to walk out of my life. Well, about 8 years ago, my adopted dad got very ill, and he was in the hospital and then was moved to a nursing home for rehabilitation. And he was placed in a semi-private room, and the gentleman in the first bed was named Mr. Peterson. And as I passed by that bed, Mr. Peterson was sitting up and his wife was feeding him. I learned later he'd had a stroke. He was nonverbal, but he could hear, and she talked, and I would have some brief conversations with her, and Mr. Peterson would nod, and then I would continue on to talk to my dad and have lunch with him. After a few months, the nursing home realized that these 2 gentlemen were not going to be able to be rehabilitated, and they were sent to long-term care, which was a different part of the nursing home. And unfortunately, the nursing home was unable to keep them as roommates. But I continued to visit my dad after church every Sunday, and I would bring lunch and have lunch with him. Well, one day I came to visit him, and he said, Mr. Peterson is dying. And so I said, well, let me go and talk to him. And I knew which room he was in, because I would pass by it, and usually I would look in and see if Mrs. Peterson was there and nod. But I know that day I hadn't noticed. But I went back to the room, and as I walked in the front of the room, there was Mr. Peterson, and it was clear that death was imminent. He was laying back in the bed. The back of it was raised up so that he could breathe easier. His mouth was wide open as he was gasping for breath. And I was wondering, well, where is his wife? And then I looked over into the far corner, and there she was, sitting in a chair, like 4 feet from him. And she was very scared, sitting there, almost, trembling. And as I stepped into the room, I looked to my right, immediate right, and there were 2 aides standing there. They were silent. And there was Mr. Peterson, gasping for breath, all alone. Well, I felt a sort of presence around me that took me into that room. And I picked up his cover and I put my hand under the cover, looking for his hand. And I expected to find it cold and lifeless. But as I touched it, it was very warm. Now, I had learned this from an EMT, that when you approach a unconscious or somebody that you think is unconscious, you take your fingers and put it in the palm of the other person and press down a little bit. And his warm fingers closed over my fingers. And yes, I'm having a little help from the dog because she wants to be held now too. He closed his fingers over my hand. So then I took my other hand under the covers and reached on top of my hand, on top of his hand, so that I could then squeeze his hand back. And there I stood, stooped over his bed, with him squeezing my fingers, and I then squeezing his in return. I don't remember saying anything. I'm not sure if he could hear, but we squeezed each other's hands, and his hands were warm. I turned to his wife and I said, "He's still here. Do you want to come and hold his hand?" At that point in time, she got frightened and her feet picked up off the floor onto the chair. And I thought she was going to climb the wall. So I turned my attention back to Mr. Peterson. And as my back got sore, I knelt on the floor, holding his hand as he held mine back, feeling the warmth of his hand. After a while, his hand let go, and it suddenly became cold. His mouth was wide open, and he stopped breathing. His eyes opened slightly, and I knew he was dead. I got up, and I nodded to Miss Peterson, who was crying, and I turned to the aides, and they nodded to me and started forward, and I turned and left. Well, I thought about that all week as far as my experience that day. And the following week, I was back in my pastor's office saying that I feel being led by God, that there's more. Now, I'm a veterinarian. I'm here in my veterinary hospital. This is the kennel room. I've been a veterinarian for 40 years now. And each week, if not as much as 3 times in a day, I have to put down somebody's cherished pet. And these pets are no longer just animals. They're these people's children. And in some cases, if they inherited the pet from a deceased mom or dad, they are that mom or dad. And they come to me with a sick pet that's suffering, and I must take that animal's life. And I can tell that the people have various emotions, and some accept it, and some leave and they're walking out in the parking lot. And so as I conclude, I realize God uses people from different backgrounds, and that I'm still a veterinarian. I just work part-time, but I have a love of ministry, and that's my story.
Thank you. Well, we have one more storyteller tonight, Diane. If you are ready to close us out. Oops, sorry, hold on.
Good evening. My name is Diane Kane. I am from Houston, Texas, and I serve as chaplain for a private Christian school. You can't imagine what it's like to be a chaplain now that we're going to school virtually. But one of the things that we've noticed is that storytelling is one of those things that still works, even though we're virtual. So I'm going to tell the same story as Ollie, but probably not as exuberantly. The tax collectors and the sinners drew close to Jesus so that they could hear what he had to say. The Pharisees and the scribes began grumbling amongst themselves. Look at him. He's surrounded by sinners. I bet he even eats with them. And overhearing that, Jesus told this story. Now, which of you, if you had 100 sheep and you lost one, would not leave the 99 alone in the wilderness and go to find the one that was lost? And when you found it, you would lift it lovingly onto your shoulders and carry it back to the fold. Upon returning home, you would shout out to your friends and neighbors, "Rejoice, I found the lost sheep. Rejoice with me. The lost is found." I tell you, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who need no repentance. And what of the woman with 10 silver coins, but losing one? Would she not light the lamp and sweep every corner and search diligently until she found it? And when she did, she would rush out to tell her friends and neighbors, "Rejoice, I found the lost coin. Rejoice with me. The lost is found." I tell you, there will be much rejoicing among the angels of God when just one sinner repents. And there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "I want what you have promised me later, right now." Now, in a modern aside, I should tell you that that's like saying, "I wish you were dead." And though it grieved that father terribly, he divided his property and gave half to this son, who wasted no time gathering all his belongings and moving to a far-off place. Now there, he wasted all that he had been given on wild living. And while he was there, a famine had spread across the land. There was no food to eat. He was starving. So he hired himself on with a citizen of that country who gave him the job, wait for it, slopping the pigs. Now he would gladly have eaten the carob pods that had been saved for the pigs, but no one would give him any. He was hurting. He said, my father has slaves that sit down to 3 meals a day. I know what I have to do. I will go back to my father. I will say, I have sinned against you. I have sinned before God. I am not fit to be called your son, but take me on as a hired hand. And with his mind made up, he goes with haste to return to his father's land. Now his father saw him coming from afar off, and he was overwhelmed with joy. He ran with heart beating and embraced him and kissed him. And the son began his speech. I have sinned against you. I have sinned before God. I am not fit to be called your son. But the father wasn't listening. He called out to the servants, my son has arrived safe and sound. Go and get a robe for him, the very best one, and put it on him. We need rings for his fingers. We need sandals for his feet. And then find a fatted calf and roast it and invite all the neighbors. Because my son that I thought was dead is not dead. He's alive. He was lost to me, but now he's found. Oh, we have to celebrate. And they had a wonderful time. Now, when the older son came back in after a day's toil in the fields, he hears the singing and the dancing, and he calls out to a house servant, what is going on? Your brother is home safe and sound, and your father has killed the fatted calf and has invited all the neighbors. The older son was enraged, and he stormed off. The father tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen. Finally, he says, for years I have slaved for you, and you have never once given me a young goat so I could party with my friends. Now, this son, who wasted all that you gave him on whores and prostitutes, comes back and you roast a fatted calf and invite the neighbors. I don't understand. No, my son, you do not understand. You have been with me always. Everything I have is yours. And now, your brother, the one we thought was dead, is not dead. He's alive. Your brother, who was lost to us, is now found. We had to celebrate.
That was a lovely telling. Thank you. And this was just a wonderful evening of lovely
It was.
stories. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne, for emceeing this. We very much appreciate this. You're doing that.
So many great stories,
Absolutely.
such gifts. Yes.
Yes.
I look forward to January. Hopefully we can start back.
There you go.
Well, oops.
There you
There
go.
goes my timer.
I'm glad I'm
Let me put in
All
a little plug. I tell Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol every year. It usually during
Ooh.
the Advent season. We're going to be doing it virtually this year because we really can't have many people in our church. So I will post that on the MBS Facebook page and stuff. So if you want to see that,
Wow.
I enjoy doing it every year.
How long of a performance is that?
Excuse me?
How long of a performance is that?
That performance is 1 hour and 45 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's fun. Fun to do.
Will tonight's show be available
Yes, I've
on
recorded.
YouTube or anywhere else where we can see it again?
Yeah, I record it. As soon as I process it, I will put it out on Facebook or
On Facebook, okay.
yeah. I'll first put it on YouTube and then I'll put that link onto Facebook.
Are you on the NBS Facebook page or?
Yes, yes.